There are three things that we're really focusing in on here at DOT now, and that is scope, budget, and schedule. Is a project on time, on budget, and is it being built to spec? With regard to the first two, we're ahead of schedule and we're on budget on this project, and we're 40% through it. That doesn't guarantee that we get to the end line that way, but we're in good shape with regard to the project time and schedule and the budget. With regard to spec, that's why you're here today, I'm sure, to discuss some of the aspects of the project. And I've, in preparation for meeting with you, I've gone over in detail what the process is at the site, what kind of inspectors we have out there, and what kind of testing is being done on a regular basis. As of right now, I can say that I've got the assurances of the personnel out there, and it appears to me that the project is within spec. Now, when I say that, let me say it with regard to the parameters of the specification itself. That was part of the contracts. We have inspectors out there on a daily basis. For all of the time that construction is happening, we have between 8 and 10 inspectors there at all times. For night construction, we have 2 inspectors that go out there even for nights. And we've instituted, for the first time in DOT, a monthly meeting of all of the area representatives and the project managers for these projects. The concept of project management that we're implementing puts a project manager in charge of a project from its conception right to the end.
So another layer of eyes?
Another layer of eyes and accountability and responsibility, okay? In the past, the only project manager in terms of the person that is totally responsible for every project under their supervision to come in on budget, on time, and on spec, all 3 of those, and for every step in the process of a project, from conception right through the final dollar paid. That includes the design process, the financing process, and the regulatory process and the construction process. There has never been one person in charge of all of that. Or, excuse me, there have. The only person in this entire organization that was responsible for the full range was the director of DOT. What has been happening historically is that at various stages of a project, the baton was passed from one person to another. So if you were to ask someone what the overall budget for a project was, for this circulator project was, well, they would, the person, depending upon who you were talking to, would be able to tell you, well, this is the budget for construction, and this is the budget for design, and this is the budget for overall administrative cost and overall charges to the project. But there were relatively few people in the building that knew that. What we've done is push that responsibility down to the project manager level. And one person will be able to tell you those 3 things at any point in time in a project's life here. And that is the first time that that's ever been implemented here. Under this contract, the way it was set up, Carty was selected as a contractor. Okay. They are required, for example, in the case of materials and the subject that we're talking about today, the materials and the methods and the quality of the construction that are going on out there, they have a quality control officer on the site that is responsible for maintaining a certain quality. They, under the contract, had to hire an independent consulting company to do testing. So that would be Thelch Engineering. And they go out independently and take the sampling and of the soils and the concrete. They analyze them, they report the results back to Carty, and they report them back to us here.
Who's paying them?
Carty is paying them, but ultimately we're paying Carty to pay them. It's part of the contract.
Some might argue it's like people will say if you want to study to turn out the way you want it to, you're going to give somebody $50,000 to figure it out. In this case, if Carty's paying the independent,
yes,
Felch,
yes,
they're paying them. Is it truly independent?
It's a very good point, and it's one that we may very well re-examine in terms of the way that we assign the responsibility for that testing lab.
Do you see a potential problem there? Or?
As a concept, I could see where there would be a perception of it. In reality, knowing the laboratories, and for example, the company Felch, they're an independent laboratory that are certified specifically for the purpose of giving independent results. Now, if they're being paid directly by us or being paid directly by a contractor, could that make a difference? And I could see, yes, from a perception standpoint, that could. And if companies were being unscrupulous, yes. That gives me cause to look at that in the future as one of the potential changes that we're making as we evolve in changing the way that we do business here. If any of our inspectors are out at this job site and they suspect something isn't quite right, they have the ability, and that's happened on this project, of having one of our own materials lab people go out there to the site and pull samples and test it ourselves independently. And we've done that. And in a couple of instances, in fact, our chief of the materials lab was out there in one instance where, some of the materials were suspect. It was a gravel base, as a matter of fact, that he had independently ourselves pull samples on that, test them, and the contractor had to remove and replace those materials. 10 inspectors sounds like a lot. If you look at the geographic area and the amount of activity that's going on that site, there may be 7 or 8 locations where they're doing utility installations. There may be several others where they're laying down pavement. There may be an area where they're doing erosion control, sedimentation control implementation. So having an inspector at every location on a site this big, 24/7 with their eyes on everything that's being done is nearly impossible. However, we provide enough coverage to assure ourselves that we're getting that 95 percentile of correctness in the job. The trenches and the pavement that's put back over them is temporary, for the most part. There are some areas where you're not going to get back to that area and you put a permanent fix in place. But for the most part, the areas that we have been working in have had a temporary pavement put over them, and in some cases, temporary trenching, where we know we're going to have to go back to that particular utility and do more work on it. And we expect that as the process goes forward and the final pavement goes down and the final sidewalks go in, that's really where you get the kind of rideability and evenness that you would expect the final product to look like. Until then, it's still an active construction zone. And we try to provide the highest level that we practically can without having to bear the expense of putting a more expensive permanent pavement over it and then have to re-dig up that expensive pavement. We put a less expensive, less precise kind of pavement cover over it that, for the time being, while we're under construction, will provide less rideability, but it's also done at a lower cost, knowing that we're just going to have to re-dig it up again to go back and do more work in that area.
In terms of compaction, does the code differentiate between permanent and temporary?
Well, no. In the trenches that we're talking about, the compaction inside the trenches over the utilities, there is a particular specification for that, the number of lifts and the kind of compaction that should be attained. And in that case, we have testing that we require to be done, compaction testing, in the area of that trench, and those inspection reports come back to us for review. From the inspection reports that I've reviewed, from the literature that I've gone back over. I have seen most of the incidences as coming back with proper test results. Some of them that weren't, I've seen the action that we took or our people took as a result of that, having the area re-excavated, the material removed and put back in. And I could never sit here and assure you that we're going to get 100%, but I assure you that we're getting the level of scrutiny that we need. The question, I think, at a higher level that we should be taking a look at is even the materials testing that is done by the independent company. Should that company be contracted directly with us instead of through the contract by the contractor? And that's one that we will be revisiting here.